everybody could have came
Everyone
right
would
up.
have been facing us. Not a big deal. Nothing to do.
I should have thought of that when I got here. This was all set up when I got here. So,
It's fine. Nothing we can do
okay.
now.
So is this okay, or do you want to move over there in the middle? Like,
No. I'm gonna leave this here until we see where everyone is. I'm probably gonna move out here so that I get. I don't
see,
know.
the only thing is this is
It's the
feedback.
Feedback. I don't know. We'll figure out when everyone gets here.
Okay, I got. He said 7 ribbons.
Yeah. So.
Why am I sitting holding the front?
Yes, thank you.
overhead first. So this end is the head that he's coming first with.
Kafir vetanin, yivi chashak v'afletehu, askebehu ki yadash mi. Yikra'eni v'enehu, imo anochi b'tzara, v'atzle v'afletehu, achmedehu, orech yamim asbiehu, Ve'ehu bishuati, orech yahamim asbiyehu, ve'ehu bishuati.
We'll stop right here for just a moment.
Get your Joe pick up. All right, you're gonna walk forward, please. On either side, gentlemen, there's a railing. I'm asking you to step on the railing for me. Please be careful. When you get over the grave, I'm going to ask you gentlemen to turn into each other. Face each other. We're going to lower right straight down. Right there. Gentlemen, do not wrap your hand around the left. Slowly down.
Amekamo yavo v'shalom. May Joe Engel, Yosef, and Moshe Halevi go unto God in peace. O God, your ways often mystify us, yet without you, we would feel cast away in a desolate void. You give us the will to live. You grieve with us and teach us compassion for the suffering. You send your messengers, our friends, who take our hand and walk with us in our sorrow. You lead us from darkness toward the light. We, who are destined to die, revere the God who keeps us alive. Life and death come from you, and the soul returns to you. We live on too, in those we love, surviving in their thoughts and in their deeds. God, we live on in your eternal care. We praise you, O truthful judge. We praise you, O compassionate parent. God gave, God took away. Blessed be the name of God. It's my honor to introduce Rabbi Scott Hoberman, the rabbi of BSBI, to do a short reading.
I'm going to read Psalm 23, first in the original Hebrew, followed by the English translation. Mizmor LeDavid, Adonai roi lo echzar, Binostasha yarbitzeni, Amei menuchos yinahaleni. Nafshi yeshovev yancheni v'maglei tzadek lema'an shemo. Gam ki elech begeit tzalmaves. Lo ira ra ki ata imadi. Shiftecha mishantacha hema yenachamuni. Taroch lefanai shulchan neged sararai. Dishanta b'Hashem en roshi kosi revaya. Ach tov v'chesed yirdefuni kol yemei chayai. B'shavti b'veis Adonai liorech yamim. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the still waters. He restores my soul. He guides me in straight paths for his name's sake. Yes, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You've anointed my head with oil, my cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever.
A 17-year-old gathers with other students to sit down and listen. In front of the group stand 3 survivors, all from Poland. One of the survivors is the 17-year-old's grandfather. His story is well known. The other 2, less so, having met only hours earlier. Quietly, intensely, purposefully, they listen to the testimonies of survival. The students ask questions. The survivors answer with care, empathy, and love. When the survivors are finished talking, something odd happens. The students are the ones in tears, and the survivors are the ones reassuring and comforting them, displaying a physical and emotional strength that belies their short statures and age. Eventually, the survivors are able to coax just enough strength from the students, and the group moves on. For 20 years, that was the crux of my Joe Engel story. When in April of 2000, Joe, Pincus Collender, and Jerry Ravsky, my grandfather, accompanied 60-some teenagers from New England on the March of the Living. In the years after, when I thought of that trip, it was that moment. Their stories, their strength, that I thought of, that amazed me. And for 20 years, I thought that that experience was unique. It was only when I came to Charleston that I realized that while my Joe Engel story was special to me, there were in fact thousands of other teenagers, adults, teenagers who became adults. 30 years worth of people, all who had their own Joe Engel story. It might be hard to imagine, but there was a time when Joe was reluctant to speak about what had happened to him. Like so many survivors in the years following the war, his life was dedicated to rebuilding. He made his way to Charleston, and as he loved to say, became a CPA, involved in cleaning, everyone knows, cleaning, pressing, and alterations, while running Glamour Cleaners on King Street. In those years, the focus wasn't on the future. It was on the present, rebuilding his life, moving on. And so Joe and his siblings kept their stories to themselves. It was only in the mid-90s when, with some prodding from Pincus Colander, Joe discovered his passion. Once he began telling his story, he couldn't stop. For years, the two were an inseparable tag team, speaking all around Charleston to professional groups, politicians, high schools, the Citadel. As Mike and Deborah said yesterday, in a way, Joe ended up finding his salvation in teaching about the Holocaust. After Pincus's death in 2008, Joe continued on his own, speaking to individuals, large groups, Jews and non-Jews alike. It made no difference. He just wanted to teach the next generation so that they and the world would never forget. Joe's story and how he taught it and used it to inform the next generation was remarkable. And yet it wasn't nearly as remarkable as Joe himself. Despite his early life, if anything defined Joe Engel, it was how he approached life with love. He loved life and Judaism. He loved his synagogues, Emmanuel and BSBI. He loved America and tzedakah. Speak to his family about any of the things that he loved, and you'll hear some of the greatest stories about Joe, which can only make you smile, laugh, and appreciate who he was even more. One of my favorite stories that Mike told me recently was about how a little while ago, when he and Joe were going through some of Joe's annual donations, there was one organization that stood out as questionable. Yet, it took Mike over half an hour to convince Joe that the Orphan Brides of Poland probably didn't need his support anymore. For Joe, no cause was too small or too unimportant. For him, all he wanted was enough money to take someone out to lunch. If he had that, he was happy. And above all else was his family. Joe loved his family. He lived to celebrate with them, to share the joyous moments, the fun, and even occasional drink of bourbon or beer. That he had no children of his own made no difference to him. To him, his nieces, nephews, cousins, they were all his children. Even as Joe knew his body was failing, sitting in the hospital that last time, he commented that what he wanted most was to live until Thanksgiving, because the family would be together and he'd have a chance to see everyone. And in his final days, when his ability to speak failed him, Joe still found a way to communicate. he'd grab your hand, pull you in, and give you a kiss on the kepi. Love was the final language he left us with. Joe's story is now our story. Joe once gave a toast to a group that he was traveling with in Poland, saying, and I can't imitate his accent here, but you can hear it in your head, "Don't you ever forget me, so long as you're gonna live. You tell this story for us, because we are not here to tell this story." It could not be more fitting that this coming Shabbat will read of Jacob's dream, the ladder that reaches to the heavens, with angels going up and down. Classical commentaries say that it's a changing of the guard of sorts, and it could not be more appropriate for our community at this moment. As Joe ascends the ladder, it is us here on this earth who become responsible, obligated to tell his story, to remember him and all those who were murdered in the Shoah for so long Joe was the conduit for their stories and memories. Now it's our turn to be the torchbearers of his legacy, of his memory. That despite living through hell, he preached compassion, care, empathy, and love for others. Now it's our turn, as a community, as a family, to continue the Joe Engel story, to speak out against hate, to promote empathy and understanding, and to never forget. Or, as Joe would have put it at the end of his own teaching, be kind to one another and always remember. The memory of Joe Engel, Yosef ben Moshe Halevi, will forever be remembered and will always be a blessing. I'd now like to welcome up the Honorable Mayor Tecklenburg of Charleston.
Thank you, Rabbi, and to the extended Engel family and friends of Joe Engel. We all are. It's an honor to be with you this morning and make just a few remarks. A couple of years ago, we honored Joe with a day, Joe Engel Day, that myself and City Council proclaimed. I feel like we have a quorum of council here today. I see council members Appel and Shade and Waring back behind me, and just a couple of the whereases that were in our proclamation. And Rabbi, you did such a beautiful job summarizing so many beautiful things about Joe's life. But whereas Joe has dedicated his life to sharing his experience with tens of thousands of people, young and old, making sure the horrors of the Holocaust are not forgotten, teaching us all the very important lesson that prejudice can lead to genocide, and he served as a shining example of how to transcend the past and overcome tragedy in our lives. So we recognize Joe for his bravery, for his kindness, his generosity, and his many achievements, and proclaim that day was Joe Engel Day. I don't know about y'all, but being around Joe Engel was always an uplifting experience for me. I got to know him a little better after I became mayor, to be honest with you. But I also always felt better about myself after I was around Joe. And I always felt better about humanity, about all of us, after I was around Joe. And as Rabbi so beautifully recounted, in essence, I believe Joe Engel was an advocate for humanity. He was an advocate for humanity. And based upon what he saw in his early life, he knew what he didn't want humanity to look like. And he very simply brought it down to that simple story of love and respect for one another and to be kind to one another. It's a very simple message that's so hard to get sometimes around the world. So, as I said, I got to know him a little better after becoming mayor, and it was after one of our Holocaust memorials down at Marion Square that Joe came up to me. He said, "Mayor, I need to talk to you about Engel Street. I need to talk to you about Engel Street." You know, and this is with all due respect to the Engel family. He said, "You know, there's a lot of Engels out there. They might not know that it's Joe Engel Street that Engel Street is named after." So, and at first I must admit, I'm thinking, because this happened right before I became mayor, that they had named the street and initially put up the sign. And sure enough, I went around to Engel Street after Joe brought this up, and it just simply said Engel Street. And I was like, I think he's right. So we dedicated the street again, and the sign now says on the top, Joe Engel Street, and on the bottom it says Holocaust survivor. I must admit, I went by there again this weekend, and we have a nice plaque there at the site, but I called Ron Small today and asked him to work with the family to come up with a better synopsis that we can take to the South Carolina Historical Society and put one of those full-fledged historical markers on Engel Street to more fully tell his story. So isn't it ironic that a man who taught tens of thousands, young and old, to remember, and as you said, Rabbi, the quote, don't forget me. Joe Engel Street, we remember you. You know, Joe, we won't forget. We won't forget you. We won't forget that you became a shining example of humanity in the way that it should be, a humanity of love and respect and compassion. And we'll have not only Ron's nice documentary, but all of us commit that we will set it up for generations to hear Joe's story and to hear the story of what happened at the Holocaust, so that we can set that same example. What an example you've been for all of us, Joe Engel. We will not forget you. God bless.
Rabbi Rafson of Chabad.
Why was Yossel loved? And how was he able to emerge from the hellish inferno of the Shoah with such a joyful disposition? In Genesis, Joe's namesake, Yosef HaTzadik, Joseph, is doomed to slavery. He set out to check on his brothers, but ends up being stripped of his famous multicolored coat, thrown into a pit of deadly snakes and scorpions by none other than his own brothers. He manages to survive, but his fortune is short-lived. and soon after he's dragged and sold to slavery in Egypt. Yet at the height of it all, when he's taken out of the pit and sold to the Ishmaelite caravan, the Bible relates a superfluous statement that the Ishmaelite camels were bearing spices of balsam and lotus. Why did the Bible tell us something so superfluous? Why did the Bible tell us what the camels were carrying? Completely out of character. And our sages explain that the typical caravan on that route was usually carrying kerosene. And Joseph was thankful that he didn't have to endure the difficult odor of the kerosene, but on his journey to slavery, he would be able to be around the fragrant spices and not to suffer from the fumes of the kerosene. This seems senseless, if not ludicrous. Joseph had lost his mother at a young age. His brothers had tried to kill him, stripped of his father, his homeland, being sold as a slave in Egypt, but yet he's thinking about the smell. He's thankful for the smell of the kerosene. Perhaps what the Torah is teaching us is something deeper, that this was the greatness of Joseph. That Joseph, despite all of his suffering, all of the hardship, he was always able to see the good, the silver lining. He was always able to see the light within the darkness. Joseph never failed to quite literally smell the roses and remain full of grace, stamina, and joy throughout his long and difficult ordeal. So too, Charleston's Joseph. What made him so special was he always saw the good in everything and everyone. His holy disposition was fueled by faith and optimism, and that's what made him so unique. When others read the handwriting on the wall, God is nowhere, Joe, because of his faith, not because of his broken English, read God is now here. When others saw dark clouds, Joe saw the sun peeking through the darkness. When others focused on the darkness of human action, Joe saw the light that emanated from the souls of those who helped him. Joe emerged from Europe's dark night uncalloused, with his spirit intact, because like Joseph, his namesake, he was able to smell the roses through the smoke and to see the light through the dark clouds. And so it was with his human interactions. Some people like some of the people they meet. Some even like most of those that they meet. And then there are those unique people that like everybody who they meet. But Joe was different. Joe loved everybody who he met, especially pretty girls. Why is it that way? Because most people are distracted by people's warts and flaws. But Joe only saw the light that emanates from the soul of another person. And that's why everybody loved him, because you knew that he loved you deeply and unconditionally. Joe didn't have biological children. However, each of us here today, and the thousands more who were touched by Joe's story and spirit, we are all his spiritual progeny. Joe emerged from the smoldering ashes of the Holocaust and rose out of Europe's dark night, teaching us to see the good in everything and everyone. His very existence is a monument to the fact that the brightest of lights sometimes shine through the darkest of cracks. So today, as we mourn his passing, let us remember to never forget his special life and legacy of our dear Yossel. For he bequeathed us, through his story and spirit, his rose-colored glasses, so that we too can always only smell the roses. Tehei nishmasar tzur b'tzar achayim, may his soul be bound in the bonds of everlasting life.
Debbie.
My husband said there are very few people on this earth that he cannot imagine walking this earth, and Joe was one of them. My cousin Joe was born in 1927, or as he told me in his later years, he might have been older than that. For my entire life, Joe has been a constant. Most people who have seen the horrors that Joe experienced in the war would have a jaded view of life, but not Joe. Although Joe saw the worst in humanity, he loved everyone. No one, and I mean no one, enjoyed life more than Joe. He loved to party, and he danced the night away like there was no tomorrow. I guess he knew what it could have been like to have no tomorrow. I have never heard Joe say a bad word about anyone. He loved all and was loved by all. My granddaughter was recently bat mitzvahed, and I used a quote to describe her heart, and it says everything about Joe's heart. The great and powerful Oz says to the Tin Man that a heart is not judged by how much you love others, but by how much you are loved by others. Joe was loved by a community and honored frequently by this community. I doubt there is a person who didn't love and respect Joe. He had the mayor a phone call away and used it quite frequently. As the mayor said, when Joe had a street named for him, Engel Street, he didn't think that was quite enough. So he called the mayor, sign came down, up went the sign, Joe Engel Street. And Mayor, I don't think you remember this part, when he didn't think that was quite enough, he once again called the mayor, and the sign came down again, and up went Joe Engel Holocaust Survivor Street. As everyone knows, Joe held court not only at the Battery, but at the Marina Variety Store. He was there to give anyone who asked him the movie about his life. But as he got older, he had trouble crossing Lockwood Street with the time allotted in the crossing. So what did he do? He called the mayor again. And he asked the mayor to put some more time onto the crossing, which the mayor did. And by the way, the mayor, he said it wasn't enough. I cannot even begin to count the number of people that Joe has educated. His passion and legacy was to make sure that we never forgot. He spoke to colleges, schools, churches, basically anywhere he can get an audience, to hear his story and to never forget what could and did happen. He proudly wore the lanyard that told everyone that he was a Holocaust survivor and discussed it with anyone who asked him. My cousin Debbie said something at hospice that resonated with me. She told the staff at hospice that they will never meet a better man. No truer words were ever said. There have been so many people that have touched Joe's life, and I dare say he has touched their lives also. In Joe's last week, he only spoke Yiddish and did not speak English. I hope that I don't leave anyone out, but there are a few people outside of the family that I need to thank. Denise Devereaux for having over 900 kids sing happy 95th birthday to Joe. Samantha Krantz and Rebecca Engel and everyone at Federation for helping him to educate others about the Holocaust. Judy Hinman of Jewish Family Services, whose help to our family was invaluable. Eileen Chepnick, or Mrs. Chepnick as he is known to Joe, who was a constant in Joe's life, seeing that we also never forget. Sandra Brett for her unwavering devotion to Joe. Charlie Agee for his friendship and devotion. Edmund Sokol and Stanley Baker for making sure that Joe always had a ride to Minion. Eli and Aaron Hyman for their devotion to Joe and recognize him for the hero that he was. And in the last few days of Joe's life, Eli made sure that he listened to songs in Yiddish and brought over a record player and albums. And to Rabbi Rafson for his love for Joe, which included giving him the comfort of speaking to him in his native tongue. Although Joe had no children, he had adoring nieces, nephews, and cousins who all looked out for him, but none were more adoring than Mike, Debbie, Chloe, and Jenny. They have shown to anybody what love and compassion looks like, and treated Joe not as a cousin, but as a father. Everyone as a family is grateful for the loving care that they took of our beloved Joe. In the Jewish tradition, Shiva is only held for a spouse, parent, or child, so there will be no Shiva for Joe. But if you want to honor Joe and the family, let's make sure he has a minyan this week, so that Kaddish can be said for him for the next 7 days. If you would have made a Shiva call, please instead come to synagogue this week. Joe deserves it. In closing, although we all shed tears of sorrow today, I find some small comfort that his tears will be tears of joy as he is embraced in heaven by those that he loved and lost in the Holocaust. May the heavens open up for you, Joe, to find this love and embrace. Rest in peace. You've done your job on this earth.
Joe's niece, Esther.
Just like modern video technology, a life is comprised of many pixels, and only when the pixels are put together do you get the illumination. Everyone here knows the story of Joe Engel, Holocaust survivor and esteemed member of this community. I would like to share some memories of Joe Engel, my beloved uncle. My earliest reference to Uncle Joe was of the night that I was born. I was told that when my mother, his sister, went into labor, it was Uncle Joe's task to hail a taxi while my father got my mother down the stairs of the apartment building. Of course, it was the middle of the night and snowing. Uncle Joe ran to the main street, running up and down until he finally got a taxi. When I was born, he was the first relative after my parents to hold me. Thus began our relationship. I remember him during many happy times of my childhood. When I was 8 years old and living in New York, my parents decided to follow the advice of our wonderful family in Charleston and move here. My parents opened up Glamour Cleaners on King Street. Uncle Joe followed us to Charleston and worked in the store. He lived with us in the apartment above Herbie and Evelyn, and next door to Louie and Ida, who were on the bottom, and Aunt Bessie, who was on the top. I guess you could call it the Engel compound on St. Margaret Street. When we lived in Charleston, I can recall a few times that helped to shape who Uncle Joe was. On one day, I was sitting on the steps of our house reading Chaim Solomon, Son of Liberty. Uncle Joe sat down next to me and asked me what the book was about. When I explained that it was about a Polish Jew who emigrated to the U.S. and helped finance the American Revolution, he was immediately fascinated. He asked to read the book when I finished it. He and I discussed it several times. Many years later, I found the book in a bookstore and gifted it to him. Sometime later, he told me that he passed the book to a child, and that gave him great pleasure. There is another memory that helped define who he was. One day, when I was hanging out in the store, my mother took me out on King Street to buy something. Uncle Joe was in the front of the store while my father was tending to something in the back. A man came into the store when Uncle Joe had stepped into the back. He proceeded to take money out of the cash register. Uncle Joe saw what was happening and ran after the thief, but could not catch him. When my mother and I returned, there was Uncle Joe sitting on a chair, panting, with my father putting wet towels on him. My father found out what had happened and started to yell at him. What if he had a gun? Uncle Joe replied, "I will never let anyone take anything away from me again." Uncle Joe loved to have a good time. When I took a class in ballroom dancing, and I remember it was BSBI, that's where it happened, and I learned the waltz, he danced me all around the apartment with a big grin on his face. When my great Uncle George sent me a bike for my birthday, both my father and Uncle Joe put it together. Uncle Joe said that he had to make sure that it was safe, so he had to take it out for a ride. There was Uncle Joe riding up and down on St. Margaret Street, smiling from ear to ear on this pink bike. It took about half an hour for him to declare it safe. After living in Charleston for 3 years, my parents decided to move back to New York. They gave the store to Uncle Joe so that he could start being his own boss. He moved into Aunt Bessie's home until he could get his own apartment. For the rest of his career, he was a successful businessman. Uncle Joe came to all of my graduations and remained an important part of my life. When I met my husband and our relationship became serious, I had to bring him to Charleston so that he and Uncle Joe could meet. His blessing was essential before we could get engaged. When I got married, Uncle Joe began his tradition of hosting the rehearsal dinner, which he did for many family members, or breakfast if it didn't work out that way. When I struggled to get pregnant and stay pregnant, Uncle Joe called me every day with his loving words of encouragement and support. He was the godfather at both of my sons' Brits. His pleasure was seeing the family increase. He told me how proud he was of me not to have given up. For my first Mother's Day, he gave me a high, telling me that there was nothing more important than life. His love for family was absolute, and with each happy life cycle event, he could always be seen either on the dance floor or at the bar. When my mother passed away, he held my hand during the entire funeral, reassuring me that he would be there for me always. We spoke to each other daily after that. When my beloved husband got sick, he supported us both with his loving words. When Paul passed away, he constantly reminded me to stay strong and put one foot in front of the other. My Uncle Joe has always been like a second father to me. For this special relationship that we shared, I will be eternally grateful. Joy and sorrow are intertwined in the fabric of life. My loss is profound, but I take great comfort in knowing that I will carry his love and the joy of my happy memories in my heart forever.
And finally, Mike.
I'm hoping I can get through this. Words cannot convey the loss I'm feeling today in my heart. Joe was small in stature, but he was larger than life itself. He was a man of simple means, but the most generous man I've ever known. His sense of tzedakah knew no bounds. He was always willing to give and help people before worrying ever about himself. He kept a ledger of every charity he donated to, not on a monthly basis, but on a weekly basis. He told us he received more mail in a day than the entire Ashley house in a week. The joke in our family was, Rabbi, you stole this, to donate to anything, even notably the fake charity, the Orphan Brides of Poland in 2021. But all joking aside, nothing meant more to Joe than his extended family. In the early years of coming to the United States, Joe lived upstairs with my grandmother and immediately became part of our family. He suffered a great loss in his young life and learned to take us all in as he was his family. We will never know how difficult that was for him, but we all know that he loved us immensely. Everyone here knows Joe's biggest wish would be to honor his memory by telling his story. Never stop talking about the Holocaust, especially about the 1.5 million innocent children who were murdered. If each of you here today told one new person his story, or any story about the Holocaust, Imagine the ripple effect that you would have. Joe was always about being kind to one another. Pay that forward for him. There are a few people I'd like to recognize that their help in the last few months was immense. To Judy Hinman, it takes a special person to do what you do. Whenever we needed anything to help Joe, your answer was always, "I'll take care of it." And please know we thank you from the bottom of our hearts for everything. To the wonderful aides that cared for him, we cannot thank you enough for looking after Joe. He was one of your own family. To everyone who reached out, know that we shared your messages and he felt that love. His last few days, we made sure to surround him with love and comfort. We will always miss him. I am 84009.
We rise for the El Maleh Rachamim prayer, the prayer that helps escort Joe's soul from this world into the next. El Maleh Rachamim shochen baromim Hamitzeh menucha nechona tacha kanfei hashchina B'ma'alot kedoshim etorim kazorakia mazirim Et nishmat Yosef ben Moshe Halevi ve'Esther shalach le'olamo B'gan Eden tiyeh menuchato Hanal barachamim hasdirehu beseter kanfecha le'olamim Utzror bitzror rachamim nishmato Adonai unachalato V'yanuach b'shalom al mishkavo v'nomar Amen. Exalted, compassionate God, grant infinite rest in your sheltering presence among the holy and pure to the soul of Joe Engel, Yosef ben Moshe Halevi ve'Esther, who has gone to his eternal home. Merciful One, we ask that our loved one find perfect peace in your eternal embrace. May his soul be bound up in the bond of life. May he rest in peace. And let us say, Amen. Be seated. One of the most powerful rituals that we have in this moment is to help physically place earth into the grave to return Joe to this earth. And so I'll ask in a moment first for the family to come up and perform this great act of chesed, this act of kindness, this mitzvah. And after the family has that opportunity, we will invite everyone here who would like to participate in this act as well to participate. Tradition teaches us that we place at least 3 shovelfuls of earth into the grave, and we use the back of the shovel for at least one of them. Just as we paused 7 times on the way up to this moment to show that this is a difficult moment and that we hesitate and don't necessarily do it with ease, so too using the back of the shovel keeps us off balance and makes this act, this moment, that much more difficult. So first I'll invite the family. As the final few family members perform this ritual, we invite, there's a lot of us today. We invite everyone else who would like to participate this to please begin forming 2 lines. Please be patient. We also have 2 small pails of earth for people who can't lift the larger shovels. There are smaller pails to be able to perform this mitzvah.